The emergency AOA meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening, giving Karen exactly 5 days to salvage her reputation and her position as board president. She spent Monday morning crafting a neighborhood-wide email that began with "Dear fellow homeowners" and ended with a detailed 17-point plan for enhanced community standards, including mandatory quarterly property inspections and a new fine structure for violations. "Grandma, why are all the neighbors mad at you?" Caden asked over breakfast, his spoon dripping cereal milk onto the pristine white tablecloth. "They're not mad, sweetheart. They're just resistant to positive change," Karen replied, but her voice lacked its usual conviction. She'd barely slept, haunted by Mrs. Chen's furious expression and the word recall echoing in her mind. By Tuesday, the situation had deteriorated further. Karen discovered that someone had started a private Facebook group called Willowbrook Without Karen that already had 37 members. Worse, her own daughter Jennifer had called to inform her that she was cutting her European vacation short to deal with the situation. "Mom, I'm getting calls from neighbors saying you called the police on a teenager for putting up a basketball hoop," Jennifer said over the phone, her voice tight with embarrassment. "And apparently Madison and Caden destroyed half the block's landscaping while you were arguing with the cops?" "That's a gross exaggeration," Karen protested, but she was staring at the repair estimates she received that morning. $1,200 for Mrs. Chen's roses, $800 for Mr. Rodriguez's herb garden, and $600 for Mr. Walsh's decorative rocks. Besides, where were the children's parents when this happened? "I was handling official HOA business." "You're handling a nervous breakdown, Mom. The kids are 8 years old. They need supervision, not a drill sergeant." Wednesday brought a new crisis. Karen was reviewing her talking points for the emergency meeting when she spotted movement in the Henderson backyard. The teenage boy wasn't just using his controversial basketball hoop. He was teaching Madison and Caden how to shoot free throws. Karen marched outside, her HOA manual clutched in her hands like a weapon. "Excuse me, Tyler Henderson, but those children are not authorized to use non-compliant recreational equipment." Tyler, a lanky kid with kind eyes and the patience of someone who dealt with difficult adults before, kept dribbling the ball. "Mrs. Whitmore, they just asked if they could play. I thought you'd want them to get some exercise instead of." He gestured vaguely toward her front yard, where the twins had been digging holes in the perfectly manicured lawn earlier. "Instead of what?" Karen demanded. "Instead of, digging to China in your flower bed." Karen spun around to see that her prized tulip garden looked like a construction site. Madison and Caden had apparently decided to create an elaborate tunnel system while she'd been inside preparing her defense strategy. "Girls, get inside this instant," she shrieked, but her voice cracked on the last word. As she herded the mud-covered twins toward the house, she heard Tyler call out, "Hey, Mrs. Whitmore, maybe you should just let them be kids for a while." That evening, Karen sat in her immaculate living room, surrounded by HOA bylaws and legal precedents, trying to figure out how everything had gone so wrong. The emergency meeting was tomorrow, and she was running out of allies. Even Gary's voice seemed to be whispering in her memory. "Karen, honey, sometimes being right isn't the same as being helpful." But admitting she was wrong would mean admitting that the last 2 years of her life, all those violation notices, all those board meetings, all those carefully documented infractions, had been a waste, and Karen Whitmore had never backed down from a fight in her life. The Willowbrook Community Center had never seen a crowd like this. Karen arrived 15 minutes early for the emergency meeting, expecting to find the usual handful of residents who bothered to attend HOA gatherings. Instead, she walked into a room packed with 43 neighbors, including several she hadn't seen since the annual Christmas party 3 years ago. "Well," she muttered to herself, adjusting her blazer and straightening her shoulders, "at least they're finally engaged in community governance." Jennifer had flown in that afternoon, and Karen spotted her daughter sitting in the back row with an expression that mixed disappointment and determination. The twins were at Jennifer's friend's house, proudly destroying someone else's property by now, Karen thought bitterly. "Before we begin," Karen announced, stepping up to the makeshift podium, I'd like to address the recent misunderstandings regarding property maintenance standards and sit down, Karen. The voice came from Frank Martinez, a retired firefighter who'd lived in the neighborhood for 15 years and had never spoken at a meeting before. We're not here to listen to another one of your presentations. Karen felt heat creep up her neck. Excuse me, but as board president, I have the right to. You have the right to remain silent, Mrs. Chen interrupted, standing up with a folder full of papers. Because I've spent the last 3 days documenting every violation notice you've issued in the past 2 years, and I think everyone here deserves to know exactly what you've been doing in our name. What followed was a systematic dismantling of Karen's reign of terror. Mrs. Chen read violation notices for grass being 1/8 of an inch too tall, for Christmas lights being removed 2 days after the HOA deadline, for children's sidewalk chalk drawings, and for wind chimes that supposedly created excessive noise pollution. She fined the Johnsons $50 because their newspaper was delivered to the wrong side of their driveway. Mrs. Chen continued, her voice growing stronger with each revelation. She cited the Martinez family for having a garden gnome that wasn't pre-approved by the architectural committee, a committee that consists entirely of Karen herself. Those were legitimate violations of our community standards, Karen protested, but her voice sounded thin and desperate even to her own ears. No, said Tyler Henderson's mother, standing up from the middle of the room. Those were the actions of someone who's forgotten that this is a neighborhood, not a prison. My son told me what happened yesterday, how you screamed at him for being kind to your grandchildren. Those little girls were having fun for the first time since they've been here, and you couldn't stand it. Karen felt the room closing in around her. You don't understand the responsibility of maintaining property values and community standards. If we don't enforce the rules, then what, Mum? Jennifer's voice cut through the crowd, and Karen turned to see her daughter walking toward the front of the room. Then what terrible thing happens if Mrs. Rodriguez's garden gnome stays in her front yard? If the Chen family hangs wind chimes on their porch? If kids draw hopscotch squares on the sidewalk? Karen opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. For 2 years, she'd been so focused on enforcing rules that she'd forgotten why the rules existed in the first place. I'll tell you what happens, Jennifer continued, her voice gentler now. People live their lives. They make their houses into homes. They build a community instead of whatever this has become. The vote was unanimous, 43-0 to remove Karen from the HOA board and dissolve her one-person architectural committee. As the meeting dispersed, neighbors lingered to shake hands and make plans for a block party, the first social gathering in Willowbrook Estates in over 2 years. Karen sat alone in the empty community center, staring at her leather-bound violation notebook. 2 years of work, reduced to nothing in the span of an hour. But as she walked to her car, she overheard Tyler Henderson talking to his mother. Do you think Mrs. Whitmore will be okay? She seemed really sad. Maybe, Karen thought, there was still something worth salvaging after all. Karen Whitmore adjusted her reading glasses and pressed her face against the living room window, her breath fogging the glass, as she watched her neighbor's sprinkler system spray water precisely 3 inches beyond the property line onto the sidewalk. Violation number 47, she thought, reaching for her leather-bound notebook, where she meticulously documented every infraction in Willowbrook Estates. At 52, Karen had transformed her retirement from elementary school teaching into a full-time occupation as the neighborhood's self-appointed compliance officer. Her husband Gary had died 2 years ago, leaving her with nothing but time, a modest pension, and an unshakable belief that order was the only thing standing between civilization and chaos. Madison, Caden, get away from Mrs. Henderson's flower bed this instant. She barked at her twin grandchildren, who were visiting for the summer. The 8-year-olds had been staying with her since their parents' messy divorce, and Karen was convinced that rigid structure was exactly what they needed. But as she turned back to document the sprinkler violation, she gasped. The Henderson boy, that 17-year-old delinquent, was installing what appeared to be a basketball hoop in his driveway. Karen's hands trembled as she flipped through the HOA manual. Page 47, Subsection C clearly stated that recreational equipment required board approval and could not exceed 6 feet in height. "This ends now," she muttered, grabbing her phone to dial 911. "Yes, hello. I need to report a property destruction in progress at 1247 Maple Drive." "No, I don't care if it's his own driveway. There are rules." 20 minutes later, as two bewildered police officers tried to explain that installing a basketball hoop wasn't actually a crime, Karen's grandchildren had somehow managed to trample through 3 different neighbors' gardens while chasing their soccer ball. Mrs. Chen's prized roses lay crushed. Mr. Rodriguez's newly planted herbs were scattered across the sidewalk, and the elderly Mr. Walsh's carefully arranged rock garden looked like it had been hit by a small tornado. "Grandma Karen," Madison panted, running up with dirt-stained knees. "We accidentally broke some stuff, but we were just playing." "Not now, sweetheart," Karen said, still arguing with the police officer about municipal codes. "Officer, are you telling me that a 10-foot basketball hoop doesn't constitute a structural addition requiring permits?" By the time she turned around, a crowd of angry neighbors had gathered, and her grandchildren were nowhere to be seen. Mrs. Chen was holding up a mangled rose bush, her face red with fury. "Karen Whitmore," Mrs. Chen said, her voice deadly calm, "your little angels just destroyed 3 months of work in my garden, and you're worried about a basketball hoop." Karen felt her face flush. "I'm sure we can discuss compensation at the next HOA meeting." "There won't be a next meeting if you're not on the board," Mr. Rodriguez interrupted, crushing damaged herb leaves in his palm. "We've had enough of your nonsense, Karen. This has gone too far." As the crowd dispersed with murmurs of recall election, and enough is enough, Karen stood alone in her driveway, realizing that her perfect system of order was beginning to crumble around her. The morning after the meeting, Karen woke to find her front yard decorated with toilet paper streamers and a sign that read, "Former Dice Theater, Live Ease Here." She stood at her window in her bathrobe, coffee mug in hand, and for the first time in months, she almost smiled. "They actually organized themselves to do something," she murmured. Finally, the twins were coming back that afternoon. Jennifer was flying out to handle the divorce proceedings, and Karen realized she had no idea how to entertain 2 8-year-olds without a schedule, structure, or rules to fall back on. She was pulling toilet paper from her rose bushes when Tyler Henderson appeared at her fence line, still in his pajamas and holding a basketball. "Mrs. Whitmore, you okay?" Karen looked at the teenager, really looked at him for the first time. He had his father's kind eyes and his mother's stubborn chin, and instead of gloating about her downfall, he seemed genuinely concerned. "I've been better," she admitted. "Tyler, I owe you an apology for yesterday, and for the basketball hoop complaint, and for..." She gestured vaguely at the neighborhood around them. "All of it, really." Tyler bounced the ball a few times, considering. "My mom says you used to be a teacher. Madison and Caden told me you're really smart and know everything about everything, but you're just really sad." The simple honesty of it hit Karen like a physical blow. "I suppose I have been sad, and I suppose I took that out on everyone else." "Want to help me teach the girls how to play horse when they get back?" Tyler asked. "I mean, if it's okay with you. And if you don't call the cops on me again." Karen laughed, actually laughed, for the first time in weeks. "I think I can manage that." That afternoon, Jennifer pulled into the driveway to find an extraordinary sight. Her mother, her daughters, and Tyler Henderson engaged in what appeared to be a very serious game of basketball, with Karen keeping score on the back of an old HOA violation notice. "Grandma Karen learned how to dribble," Madison announced, running over with dirt-stained knees and grass in her hair. "She's not very good at it, but she tries really hard." "That's wonderful, sweetheart," Jennifer said, staring at her mother in bewilderment. Karen's perfectly styled hair was messed up, her crisp blouse was wrinkled, and she was smiling. Over dinner, Karen made an announcement that surprised everyone, most of all herself. "I've been thinking about what happened last night," she said, cutting green beans with surgical precision. "Some habits died hard, and I realized that I never actually asked anyone what they wanted from the HOA. I just decided what was best, and tried to force everyone to comply. "So what are you going to do now?" Jennifer asked carefully. Karen was quiet for a long moment. "I think I'm going to start by apologizing to every single neighbor I've wronged, and then I'm going to figure out how to be a grandmother instead of a drill sergeant." "What about the HOA stuff?" Kaden asked, jabbing her green beans with a fork. "Are you still gonna be the boss of everyone?" "No, sweetheart. I'm not the boss of anyone anymore. And you know what? I think that might be exactly what I needed." Later that evening, after Jennifer had left for the airport and the girls were asleep, Karen sat on her front porch for the first time in years. Mrs. Chen was watering her replacement roses across the street, and when she saw Karen, she raised her hand in a tentative wave. Karen waved back, then pulled out her phone and began typing. "Dear neighbors, I owe you all an apology." But as she wrote, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her. Glancing up, she caught a glimpse of a figure in the shadows between the streetlights, someone who seemed to vanish the moment she tried to focus on them. The next morning, she would find a note slipped under her door. "The neighborhood remembers everything, Karen. Some grudges run deeper than HOA violations." Karen folded the note carefully and slipped it into her pocket, wondering if her journey toward redemption had only just begun, and if some neighbors might not be ready to forgive and forget quite so easily.